Good evening. Please take your seats. Welcome. Welcome to the 15th anniversary celebration of the Newark History Society. I'm George Robb, a board member of the Newark History Society, a proud Newark resident, and your master of ceremonies for tonight. No. We'll never get through this if you applaud for everyone, so yeah, just for the important people. That means it's my job to keep things moving along at a brisk pace, which I will try to do, so let's move right along. We have two main items on tonight's agenda: to honor Warren Grover with our Outstanding Newark Scholar Award. Yes, okay. We can clap for Warren. And to hear the Paul Stellhorn lecture by Timothy Crist, who will speak on historians, civic memory, and the story of Newark. It's much more exciting than it sounds. The Newark History Society was founded in 2002 to expand knowledge of Newark's past so that we may better understand the present and our future. The Society now organizes 5 programs each year and sponsors the Newark Archives Project. Now, we couldn't do any of this without the support of you, our members, or the support of our partner organizations, the New Jersey Historical Society, the New Jersey Performing Arts Center, Rutgers University Newark, and of course the Newark Public Library. We're all gathered tonight in this beautiful historic building. I'd like to ask the library director, Jeffrey Trezak, to say a few words of welcome.
I was going to say, I hope you'd applaud for the librarian at the very least. So, I don't know what Rob was talking about. Don't applaud for people. But good evening and welcome to the Newark Public Library. I'm Jeffrey Trezak, and I'm the still, I think, relatively new director here. Very happy to be here and thrilled that you are all able to join us here this evening. Just briefly, I wanted to mention that my husband, Michael, and I moved here in February of this year, and we're living in the Forest Hill section of Newark, and we're absolutely thrilled to be living and working in Newark at this time. Although he's never lived outside of St. Louis and he thinks this is cold right now, and I haven't had the heart to tell him. I feel quite fortunate to be here in Newark at this time. Our partnerships in the library are expanding, and of course the Newark History Society is an important part of that. And I'm also honored to be at the helm of an institution that has such strong local history collections that we are now digitizing through a grant that we received from Carnegie. Those of you who I've had a chance to meet, or some of you may have read my bio, I've largely spent my career in academic libraries, most recently at Washington University in St. Louis. So to be at an institution like Newark Public Library with our strong historical collections is just a real treat for me. I hope you enjoy this evening's program, and I want to thank you again for your participation and also your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I'd like to briefly acknowledge my fellow members of the Newark History Society's Executive Committee, many of whom are here tonight. Actually, I believe all of whom are here tonight, so I'll just read off their names. Please hold your applause till the end. Marion Bolden, Natalie Borisovitz, Walter Chambers, Timothy Crist, Linda Caldwell Epps, Warren Grover, Mark Krasovic, Gail Malmgreen, Thomas McCabe, Brendan O'Flaherty, Guy Sterling. It's hard to believe it's been 15 years, but if you look around the room, you will see displayed flyers from our past programs, almost 70 of them, and we didn't even have room for all of the flyers. But these represent most of the programs that this organization has put on over the past 15 years. One thing they all have in common is that they were all designed by Robert Hartman, a Newarker and an extremely talented designer. Yeah. We have been so fortunate to have Bob as a member and a supporter. Not only does he design the flyers, but he's designed our website, our stationery, the invitations for tonight's event. Bob, if you'll come up for a minute as a very small token of our admiration and appreciation, please accept this gift book which is a special 1923 limited edition produced by the Carteret Book Club of Newark. It is about the Newark writer Stephen Crane. It has an essay by Newark Mayor Thomas Raymond and a woodblock illustration of Crane by the artist Rudolph Ruzicka. Will you please join me in thanking Bob for 15 years of dedication and service? And you got to keep doing them now. Yeah. I'd now like to ask Walter Chambers to come forward to make the presentation of the Outstanding Newark Scholar Award. Walt is a native Newarker and a long-standing board member of the Newark History Society. And Warren, please come up also.
Two hop-alongs together. It is a very special honor to deliver this presentation because of our honoree tonight, Warren Grover. Hold your applause, because I'm going to mention his name many times in a very few minutes. This is the second time this award will be presented. The first was 5 years ago at our 10th anniversary celebration. The late Dr. Clement Price was the recipient. Selecting the second honoree was one of the easiest decisions the Newark History Board ever made. Let me tell you why in what I will call a brief story about Warren Grover. Chapter 1, the early years. Warren was born and raised in Newark, New Jersey. He graduated from Peshine Elementary and Weequahic High School and received a Master of Arts degree from New York University. Chapter 2, scholarship. Warren was an instructor of history at the former Newark College of Engineering from 1961 to 1966. In 2005, he was also a visiting professor of Newark history at Rutgers, Newark. Chapter 3, a corporate leader. For some 30 years, from 1966 to 1996, Warren was president of MDM Technologies, a company that grew to become the largest department store mailer in the country. Chapter 4, community service. During the early 1960s, a period best remembered as the Civil Rights era, Warren was an active member of Newark Essex Corps, the Congress of Racial Equality. He was also executive director of the Newark Committee for Full Employment. Warren served a number of other organizations and boards, including the Jewish Historical Society of New Jersey, Jewish Community Housing, the New Jersey Historical Society, and perhaps most importantly, Warren was a co-founder of the Newark History Society in 2002. This organization has since developed the Newark Archive Project. Chapter 5, publications. Warren's master's dissertation in 1961 at NYU was entitled Relief in Newark, 1929 to 1933. Warren is well known for his groundbreaking book, Nazis in Newark, published in 2002, and he is currently working on a book, Newark in Extremis. Is that right? Now, there is a recurring theme in this description of Warren Grover. How many times have you heard Newark or New Jersey? Finally, Chapter 6, Awards and Honors. Warren has been honored and cited by many other organizations, some of which include the Newark Arts Council, the Newark Public Library, and the Jewish Historical Society of New Jersey. Throughout this busy life, Warren has had the love and support of family and friends. His wife, Andy, son, Owen, grandson, Devin, and brother, Stuart, are just a sample of the many family members and friends who are here. And I special note to Stuart, who traveled from Tacoma, Washington, to be here for this program. Thank you, Stuart. Now, based on this description, I am sure you will agree that the Newark History Society was wise to name Warren Grover the 2017 Outstanding Newark Scholar. Now, this award is a lot more than just your standard plaque or certificate. We also include a keepsake that's personalized for the honoree. We did that 5 years ago, and we do that again tonight. I refer you, as already mentioned by George, to the 70 posters displayed around this room. And as noted, all artfully designed by Bob Hartman. And we have published them in a deluxe volume, one per page, just for our Newark scholars. But first, the proverbial certificate. And it simply says, Newark History Society, Outstanding Newark Scholar Award, Warren Grover, November 14, 2017. Here it is. I lost it. And then here is a volume of all of these posters. My friend, and you can't read it now. My friend and colleague, Warren, you do us all proud. Thank you.
I don't know what I'm on, but certainly something. Thank you, Walter. Thank you, Tim, and members of the Executive Board of the Newark History Society. Thank you for tonight's honor. Also, I want to thank the Newark Public Library for hosting tonight's event. It is a most fitting venue since the library has been such an important part of my life. When I was a lad, I spent many wonderful hours in the Osborne Terrace branch of the library. At this building, on this very floor, I researched my master's thesis Relief in Newark, 1929-1933. And most importantly, during this time, I met my wife, Andrea, in the microfilm room. I spent 3 years doing research for Nazis in Newark in the New Jersey Information Center on the 3rd floor. And recently, I've been doing research for a new book on Newark. And to top it all off, Andy and I in 2008 received the library's Lasting Impression Award. After the death of Paul Stellhorn, a Newark historian and senior staff member of the library, I met with the late Charles Cummings, Newark official historian and library official, to discuss how we could memorialize Paul's name and works. Charles suggested that we should all include in our conversations Dr. Tim Crist, chairman of the Friends of the Newark Library. When Tim and I met for the first time, we sensed each other's love of Newark history. And importantly, our relationship clicked. And thus began our 15-year friendship and partnership. After casting about for an appropriate way to honor Paul, Charles, Tim, and I agreed to form a Newark History Society. We soon learned that 2 other efforts at forming such a society had failed. After Ken Jackson, one of America's leading urban historians, told us that Newark, New Jersey was the largest city in America without its own history society. With this information, our triumvirate set out to bring a history society to Newark. The Newark Library, the New Jersey Historical Society, and Rutgers Newark agreed to be our partners, unofficial. From the beginning, the late Clement Price, chair of the Rutgers Institute on Ethnicity, Culture, and the Modern Experience, provided support and enthusiasm. From his institute, many fine students of Newark history have emerged. 2 of them are sitting on the Newark History Board today, and more will come later. The Newark History Society's first public program was held in October 2002 in this building. The subject was the city's Greek community. We signed up over 50 members at our first meeting. Our second meeting, the program was held at the New Jersey Historical Society, and the subject was the book that Steve Golan had just written, The Newark Teacher Strikes, 1970-1971. This program elicited a lot of interest. When we held it, it also elicited a lot of controversy. At one point, I thought we were going to have to call the police in. That event drew a large audience, much publicity, and made more members for our society. That evening, the society took off. Today, we have over 250 paid members. We now have held over 70 public programs, and you can see them all on the wall. Topics include the city's neighborhoods, beer and jewelry industry, social, political, and economic history, architecture, and music, and also Newark's role in the Revolutionary, Civil, and World War I. Tim has delighted us with 3 programs on Newark's Puritan past. We even had a program on Newark's World War II Nazi spy, Karl Kreber. Most of these programs are available on the Newark History Society's YouTube server. The strength of the Newark History Society resides in our talented board. 3 of our members have published books on Newark, and there's several more in progress. On Newark and 2 more areas that are important. Board members have taken part in almost all of our programs, either as chairman, members, panelists, what have you. Every time we have a program, we have at least 2 people from the society on the program. Despite or because of our success, Tim and I began to discuss a way the society could make a permanent contribution to Newark history. I was writing on my second book, going through the hundreds of archives having to do with Newark, and the time-consuming process of first finding the repositories and then finding the right archival collections. Others were going through the same process, doing that research. Why not create an online directory of repositories with Newark-related archival collections? Very fortunately, the choice for an experienced archivist to lead the project was obvious. Gail Momgreen, a Newark History Society board member and a longtime friend, was going to retire from her position as an archivist at the Tammament Library of New York University. When I approached her about being the project manager, she smiled and said, "I'd love to." However, she wanted a half year off to finish some work she had to do at the Tammament Library, and that gave us time to set up an archival advisory board and to see how we could get the computer know-how and actually the computer installation that would make it possible to do what we wanted. Within a few hours of discussion, everybody said the Newark Archive Committee has to have a partner that has a lot of computer know-how. Ron Becker, who is the Special Collections Archivist for Rutgers, New Brunswick, said, "Warren, it's obvious that has to be Newark Rutgers." So, a few days later, I met with Steve Diner, Chancellor of Newark Rutgers at the time. He knew about the Newark History Society. We knew each other. And it took about 2 minutes for him to enthusiastically say, "We're in." We drew up an agreement which was signed March 2008. It is now 8 years since we first conceived of the project, and it has been fully functional for 6 years. The first repositories surveyed were chosen by the Archives Advisory Board, included the obvious Newark Library, Newark Archives, Newark Museum, and the New Jersey Historical Society. To date, the Newark Archives project has created detailed descriptions of Newark-related materials in nearly 3,300 archival collections. 3,300 archival collections. These were held by 115 repositories, so you can imagine they've been very busy. He first went to collections in Newark, New Brunswick, Princeton, Trenton, and a host of other New Jersey cities, as well as New York, Philadelphia, Washington, Chicago, and even London. In addition, the staff has created hundreds of more descriptions of Newark archives from catalogs, online guides, and microfilm. New descriptions are added to the database every week. The value of these collection descriptions, searchable as a group by subject, by time period, can be seen in the thousands of visits the Newark Archive database has had. It is our hope that all serious scholars writing on Newark will discover and employ the Newark Archives database. At the same time, the Newark History Society's programs have gained larger audiences and become an important part of Newark's cultural life. In 2006, the Society and the New Jersey Performing Arts Center began a collaboration. We have now joined with the PAC in presenting programs and are part of PAC's outreach efforts. We also continue to hold events at the Newark Library and the New Jersey Historical Society. We participated in the 350th anniversary of Newark and the 50th anniversary of the Newark riots. The Society has been recognized for contributions to Newark history by the Newark Preservation and Landmarks Committee, and also by the New Jersey Historical Commission, who cited us for outstanding service to public knowledge and preservation of the history of New Jersey. Unfortunately, Charles Cummings is not here anymore. We would love to share this anniversary with Charles. He passed away in 2005. Tim has memorialized him by editing and making available online some 500 articles that Charles wrote that were published in the Newark Star Ledger on Newark history. On our 15th anniversary, the Society can look over important accomplishments. Holding the 70 programs, we have enriched and enhanced the fascinating city of Newark and engaged so many Newark residents, past, present, and probably future. Our archive project is used nationwide. We continue to move forward. We have our 2018 schedule already made. The Newark History Society has enriched my life beyond measure. It has led to an increase in my knowledge of Newark history, and equally, or perhaps even more importantly, I have made wonderful new friendships, and deepened existing friendships. My hope is that the Society will continue to foster the knowledge of Newark history for years to come. Thank you very much.
Warren really is the godfather of Newark history. Perhaps I should say the Gonzo Makra of Newark history. He is certainly a person who makes things happen, and he's not just a talker. Oh, God knows he's a talker, but he is a doer. He's a doer. Will Linda Caldwell-Epps come forward to introduce our keynote speaker? Linda's the president of 1804 Consultants. She's a longtime Newark resident and, of course, a board member of Newark History Society.
Thank you, and it's so wonderful to see all of you here on this great occasion. My introduction to the Newark history world, or the Newark history community, was back in 2004, August 14th, I think, 2004, when Warren interviewed me for a position I had applied for at the New Jersey Historical Society. So I am a fan of Newark history because of you. Thank you. It's my pleasure to introduce Tim Crist as our Paul Stellhorn lecturer this evening. A historian is a kind of detective in search of the fact, remote or otherwise, that brings to a set of events apparently unconnected to each other that link that unites them. Their justification and the logic for those events occurring. The historian actually delights in finding such facts, and that's really not easily understood by others. But for us, documents that others find boring light up our lives. Looking through faded cursive writing and yellowed, crumbling paper, or looking in collections of long-forgotten chronicles, offer us a bolt of curiosity that makes life wonderful for us. We read things that are taped together and falling apart, that give us paper cuts, that give us watery eyes from the dust, but it doesn't matter. Week after week, day after day, we look through them anyway, and it makes us happy. Tim Crist is one of those weird people. I've seen his eyes light up, his hand raise, and a eureka smile come on his face at the mention of slightest little tidbit of news from Newark trivia or Newark history. As you've heard, he's one of the founders of the Newark History Society and served as its president since its beginnings 15 years ago. He's also the president of the Board of Trustees of the Newark Public Library. Tim earned his undergraduate degree from Yale University and his PhD in history from Cambridge University. He came to Newark in 1979 to work for Prudential, and after 37 years with the company, he retired last year. He's currently, again, in those stacks with those yellowed papers, working on a book about Newark in the colonial period. His topic tonight, history, civic memory, and the story of Newark. So please join me in welcoming Tim Crist. Okay? Not gonna do it.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you all for coming tonight. It's Good, I can figure that out. It's a real honor to be asked by my colleagues to give this talk named for Paul Stellhorn. I first met Paul more than 30 years ago when at the New Jersey Council for the Humanities. That was after he worked for the New Jersey Historical Commission and before he ended his career here at the Newark Public Library. It was his death at too early an age, as Warren said, that led some of us to talk and to form the Newark History Society. In October 1835, Benjamin Thompson Pearson, known as BT, published his first directory of Newark that included a 24-page unsigned historical sketch. At that point, Newark had existed for almost 170 years, virtually half of our 350-year history. But this is the first narrative that I have found of Newark's history. Whoever the author was, and I think it was Pearson himself, wrote during a period of enormous change for Newark, when citizens sensed a sharp break from their agricultural past, even as they embraced an industrial future. The population of Newark had doubled in just 5 years to about 18,000. The Morris Canal had been completed in 1832. The same year, a Newark whaling company ship was fitted out and returned 27 months later with 3,000 gallons of barrels of oil and 15,000 pounds of bone. Newark had been designated a port of entry in 1833, and nearly 100 vessels traded with New York City and other northern and eastern ports. The first railroad followed in 1834 and quickly gained acceptance. The number of monthly passengers doubled over the course of the first year to more than 16,000 by August 1835. In 1836, 3 banks and 3 property insurance companies added to commercial vitality, as did 30 dealers in dry goods, with their stores clustered on Broad, Market, and West Market streets. The great inventor Seth Boyden had moved to 35 Bridge Street. There were 10 coach manufacturers in Newark, 14 boot and shoe makers, 3 jewelry firms, along with 112 grocery stores, 26 attorneys, 23 doctors, and 2 sausage makers. The list goes on. Change was also happening in local politics. Newark had been governed by a town meeting since its formation in 1666. But just a couple months after this first directory was published, a new state law permitted Newark to incorporate as a city and for the first time elect a mayor and a city council. The makeup of Newark's population in the 1830s was shifting as well. Even a decade before Ireland's Great Famine, the Irish had come to Newark in numbers large enough to stir sort of a nativist sentiment, working on the Morris Canal and on other projects. And here we may have a clue as to why Pearson included the historical sketch in his city directory. Yes, he wanted to spark interest in his new business venture. And yes, he was happy to engage in what Newark historian Paul Stellhorn later called boosterism. But I suspect Pearson was also putting forward a narrative of Newark intended to give special place to those born in this country and indeed to the founding families. He himself was a direct descendant of Abraham Pearson, the founding minister of Newark, and among the 7th generation of Pearsons living in Newark and Morristown. The same sort of nativist sentiment would later shape Newark's 250th anniversary in 1916, and of course, we see similar nativist forces at work around the country in our own day. But by focusing on Newark's early history, Pearson was helping to preserve Newark's New England Protestant culture against a surge of Irish Catholic immigration, even as he cheered Newark's rapid economic growth that depended in part on the availability of cheap Irish labor. His nativist assumptions are perhaps most explicit in the categories he used to estimate Newark's population in 1835. Free white Americans, 10,542. The Irish population, about 6,000. English and Scots, about 1,000. Germans, at that point, just 300. Free people of color, 359. Pearson doesn't mention slavery in his sketch, and his estimate of the number of free people of color turned out to be too low by half. In 1836, the newly established City Council commissioned a detailed city census that found 720 people of color in Newark, not including the 10 others who had been enslaved when New Jersey abolished slavery in 1804 and still remained in bondage more than 30 years later. While Pearson ignored slavery, he was fully tuned into the then current controversy about the removal of Native Americans to Indian Territory in the West. As he prepared the first directory, the U.S. War Department was taking a census of Cherokees in southern states. The infamous Trail of Tears had started with the removal of Choctaw a few years earlier and would continue in 1838 with the Cherokees. Pearson was quick to assert that the original settlers of Newark were entirely blameless on this score. And early on in his essay, he protested too much, way too much, when he declared, "However unjustly the Aborigines may have been dealt with elsewhere, no act of our ancestors can be pointed to with the slightest reproach by the most jealous advocate of Indian rights." Pearson concluded his historical sketch with a hopeful comment that at a future time, the outline may be filled up and extended. Although he made small changes over the next couple years, he never got around to filling up his outline or extending the narrative. That was left to historians who followed, and the task is by no means complete today. I have talked at length about Pearson's historical sketch, not because it's such a valuable record of Newark's early history, but because it incorporates elements that have characterized most efforts to tell Newark's story. These include his limited use of archival resources, his unabashed boosterism, his effort to shake civic memory, and his unrecognized biases anchored in a particular time and place. He made little or no effort to step outside Newark's story and place it in a larger context, or to compare and contrast Newark's early history with the New England experience, or indeed with other towns in New Jersey. Local history is often messy and parochial in these ways, which is why it sometimes doesn't get much respect. But democracy is messy too. Decades ago, Fernand Braudel challenged historians to look down, not just up, at everyday life, not just at the vast plane of the market economy or the grand level of government or great leaders. How can one, he asked, understand the towns without understanding the countryside, money without barter, the varieties of poverty without the varieties of luxury, the white bread of the rich without the black bread of the poor? Local history gets at the experience of everyday life in different periods, bringing the lives of ordinary and sometimes indeed extraordinary people into the light. Its granularity provides both context and texture to larger narratives, and at its best, it works to complicate and even challenge overarching theories and narratives. Local history also shapes and is shaped by civic memory. And few things are messier or more important than private memories that evolve and coalesce over time into civic memory. But at the same time, local historians usually succeed most when they lead people to ask new questions while introducing complexity into an otherwise simple civic narrative. No one understood this better than the late Clement Price. In his essay, History and Memory, which serves as the epilogue to a collection of essays by various authors called Baltimore 68, he explained how, quote, the American city became contested territory, framed over time by more complicated memories by blacks, ethnic whites, and those entrusted with public policy. He added one's race, generation, social class, and civic vantage point all contribute to the making of civic memory. Civic memory, he said, emerges out of the social landscape of the community writ large. Civic memory has always been at work throughout Newark's long history, from how local citizens framed the land disputes in the 1740s to Alexander McWhorter's century sermon in 1801 that recalled the hardships of the first settlers while getting most of the early history entirely wrong, to the 250th anniversary celebration in 1916 and the 300th anniversary celebration in 1966, which both emphasized the old-fashioned purpose of using civic memory to foster patriotism and social order, while leaving out much of the story and many of the residents of Newark. I think civic memory becomes more contested and certainly more important in transitional periods. Periods when one group is gaining power and another is finding its influence diminished. When a city, or indeed the country at large, is looking honestly at past injustice, or when a city is going through a period of dramatic growth or gut-wrenching decline. The stories of gain can be empowering, while the stories of loss and betrayal can be painful, such as those by Newark residents recalling the destruction of their neighborhoods to make way for public housing and new highways. The oral record can be most illuminating when it captures the memories and experiences of people long ignored or left out. In recent decades, Newark's public memory has expanded to take on a much more democratic scope through such projects as the Kruger-Scott Oral Histories, the Latino Oral History Collection here in this library, and the Queer Newark Initiative at Rutgers Newark. And of course, no topic has been more important to civic memory in Newark in recent years than the 1967 rebellion, as we saw again in July when we marked the 50th anniversary. Writing in last week's New Yorker about Philip Roth, Adam Gopnik suggested that Roth's patriotic premise was, you get America right by remembering Newark as it really was. Of course, Roth did that brilliantly through his fiction. But with the tools available to those of us who pretend to be historians, we also need to remember Newark as it really was. There are, of course, different ways of doing that. This work of history takes place in various ways. The historian Eric Foner reminded readers of The Nation a few years ago that Friedrich Nietzsche identified three approaches to the writing of history: the monumental, the antiquarian, and the critical. And I want to use that framework to suggest how the different approaches have played out among Newark historians as they attempted to remember Newark as it really was. We have had our share of authors who have attempted monumental history, what you might call the school of let us now praise famous men and our fathers that begat us. I put Joseph Atkinson in 1878 in that category, along with Frank Urquhart in the early 20th century, and even John Cunningham on occasion in our own day. We've had those with an antiquarian bent, who brought hidden resources to light and were not afraid to tell small stories as well as large ones. These Newark historians include William Shaw in the 19th century, as well as Miriam Studley and Charles Cummings, both of the Newark Public Library in the 20th century. But refreshingly, Newark has also drawn critical historians who have paid close attention to original sources, showed a studious concern to get the details right, and been able to draw parallels and contrasts to events in other places and in other periods. There are many, but let me name just a few. I think of Jonathan French Stearns' First Church in Newark from 1853. Or Clement Price's 1975 dissertation, The Afro-American Community of Newark, 1917 to 1947. This slender Clem is from 1984, when he was chairman of the New Jersey State Council of the Arts. Or Susan Hirsch's remarkable Roots of the American Working Class, published in 1978. Or Paul Stellhorn's PhD thesis, Depression and Decline, Newark, New Jersey, 1929 to 1941, that he completed in 1982. Or Warren Grover's Path-Breaking Nazis in Newark, published in 2003. And Mark, I'm including you. Or Mark Krasovic's Newark Frontier, Community Action in the Great Society. It's perhaps worth noting that all of these historians, with the exception of Warren, were born outside Newark and brought an outsider's perspective to Newark's story. That was certainly the case for Joseph Atkinson, who wrote the first monumental history of Newark. He was born in Northern Ireland, served in the Union Navy during the Civil War while still a teenager, became a correspondent in Newark for the New York Herald after the Civil War. He was only 29 when he realized that, as he put it, no complete history of Newark existed, and decided to fill the gap for a city that had pulled off the stupendous industrial exposition of 1872. He began research in 1875 while continuing to write for 2 daily newspapers, and he found what he later described as, quote, abundant materials with which to weave a volume, not alone interesting, but instructive and valuable. And in addition to his archival research, he tapped into the civic memory of Newark by interviewing descendants of the early settlers and a cross-section of the first generation of the Irish and German immigrants to Newark, who by the 1870s were well advanced in years. He included an account of slaveholding in Newark based on his review of early newspapers, and he was quick to give credit to the Sentinel of Freedom newspaper for coming out strongly against slavery late in the 18th century. An immigrant himself, he also provided sympathetic accounts of the first Irish and German immigrants to Newark in the 1820s and 1830s. Frank Urquhart wrote his massive history of the city of Newark, and this is my somewhat battered set of 3 volumes, for the Lewis Historical Publishing Company in 1913, building on the much shorter works he wrote years earlier for use in Newark's public schools. Urquhart was born in Toronto in 1865 and grew up in Leominster, Massachusetts. And while he was a student at Dartmouth, his family moved to Newark so that his Scottish-born father could become superintendent of one of the large celluloid manufacturing companies here. He joined his family in Newark after graduating from Dartmouth in the class of 1887 and spent the rest of his life as a journalist in Newark, most of it with the Sunday Call. And Urquhart could perhaps be considered the father of the preservation and landmarks movement in Newark, because he was the one who suggested to the Newark Schoolmen's Club the idea of marking historical spots with plaques and tablets, many of which you still see around the city today. And later, as a member of the Committee of 100 for the 250th anniversary, he chaired the subcommittee to erect historical monuments and tablets. It was Urquhart's association with John Cotton Dana that led to his research into Newark history. Urquhart and Dana had much in common. Dana was 9 years older, but both grew up in New England, both went to Dartmouth, both wrote easily, and both shared the Progressive era's passion for public institutions, especially the public library and public schools. Dana met Urquhart soon after becoming director of the library in 1902, and within 2 years he had persuaded him to write Newark, the Story of Its Early Days, a slim pamphlet that the library published in May 1904 to meet the need that Dana saw for brief stories of Newark's history. The first pamphlet was followed in December 1905 with Newark, the Story of Its Awakening, and then in 1907 with Newark, the Story of Its Prosperity, which the library sold for 5 cents and made available to large numbers for use in the schools. Dana hoped that the series would spur, quote, a more rapid growth of the best kind of civic pride and patriotism, the kind that comes from knowledge, familiarity, and respect. In 1908, Urquhart recast and somewhat expanded the 3 pamphlets into a short history of Newark with illustrations, a chronology, a list of historic places, and an index. Its simple style, numbered topics, few dates, and lack of footnotes all show its purpose for use in the Newark schools, but it was also popular among adult readers. The Board of Education adopted the book as a supplementary reader, and Urquhart and Dana believed that it was the first school history of a city published anywhere in America. It was reprinted in 1910, expanded in 1916, and republished as late as 1853. Urquhart developed an expansive knowledge of Newark, which he conveyed in a highly readable, if uncritical, narrative when he expanded the pamphlet and his short history into the much longer history of the city of Newark in 1913. He reviewed old controversies with sympathy to all sides, but he avoided unpleasant topics, like slavery, almost entirely, and used only a very light touch to discuss the arrival of the Irish and Germans in the 1830s and the Italians and other immigrants in the 1880s and 1890s. Urquhart and his contemporaries did not understand what has become so clear in the scholarship of recent decades, that the most revealing aspects of a culture or of a city take place at the margins, and that by focusing on the boundaries, we can gain important insight not just about the margins, but about the center as well. In contrast, Urquhart's larger civic purpose in writing his history was much more limited and much more conservative, and that purpose is evident in his description of the founders of Newark. And let me read this. If the founders of Newark were living today, they would, many of them, hold positions of high responsibility and trust, not only in the affairs of the city, but in the state, and possibly in national affairs. It is essential that readers of Newark's history should understand this at the beginning, if they are to grasp why and how it was that Newark became one of the leading communities of all New Jersey from its settlement and forged ahead of them all soon after the War for Independence. This is monumental history, in style certainly, but also in heft, since Urquhart expanded his short history to encompass 845 pages. And on top of that, the Lewis Publishing Company added to the scope and girth of the project by commissioning articles on manufacturing, banking, churches, medicine, and perhaps most important today, the Germans in Newark, a 105-page essay by William von Katzler, editor of the New Jersey Freie Zeitung. But still not content, the publisher tacked on a third volume with biographies of Newark worthies, covering an additional 400 pages, intended, no doubt, to increase vanity sales. John Cunningham's History of Newark, simply called Newark, and first published in 1966 and significantly updated in a second edition in 1988, can also be placed in the category of monumental history. Like Atkinson and Urquhart, Cunningham spent years as a journalist, but unlike them, he managed to earn his livelihood as an historian, writing commissioned studies as well as works that stem from his own interests. More than anything, Cunningham wanted to reach his audiences. He wanted to get them excited about history, whether they were school children, college students, or the general public. And that's why, if you look at John's work, there's such a strong narrative thread. That's why he also wrote film scripts and experimented with different media. And that's why he made such extensive use of photographs and illustrations. Following John's death 5 years ago, he died just a few days short of his 97th birthday. We held a gathering on the 4th floor of the library to remember him. Clement Price provided his assessment of Cunningham's Newark for that occasion. Calling it Cunningham's greatest book, Clem added, "It was essential reading back in the day. It became all the more essential some years later when in 1988 the New Jersey Historical Society brought out a revised edition. In that revision, John had to take into consideration what he probably could not nearly a generation earlier, that Newark's infamous decline was ignored by seemingly all but that decline's most notable victims, its poor black residents." But Clem concluded his assessment in this way: "It remains one of the most important books about Newark, and for that matter, any American city." In addition to supporting the institutions that made his work possible, in particular the New Jersey Historical Society and this library, Cunningham made sure to thank the librarians and archivists who assisted his research, notably Miriam Studley. Warren, I think you remember Miriam. And Charles Cummings, whom so many of us knew and worked with, who both worked in the New Jersey room here at the library. As I noted earlier, Studley and Cummings are examples of historians with an antiquarian bent. They each developed an encyclopedic knowledge of Newark by immersing themselves in the details and byways of our long history. And each one made very important contributions to the study of Newark, not least by helping so many researchers with their own projects. But unfortunately, neither one wrote an extended narrative about Newark. Studley was an accidental historian, but she was one of those whippet-smart people who take to it naturally. Born in China, raised in the Philippines as the daughter of Episcopal missionaries from New Jersey, she attended Vassar and taught briefly before becoming a children's librarian, first in New York and from 1931 here in Newark. She started working with the library's New Jersey reference materials in 1944 and created the separate New Jersey room in 1951. In 1960, she played a key role on Newark's Historic Sites and Buildings Committee, recording extensive information on important structures and laying the groundwork for later efforts to nominate buildings for landmark status. In 1949, the Newark Evening News asked her to write a series of articles on local history called "When Newark Was Younger." And over the next 21 months, she prepared 34 essays, all gracefully written, copiously illustrated, and full of interesting information and anecdotes. These essays are perhaps a bit nostalgic, and they don't explore social or political controversies, but they merit attention. Perhaps the Newark History Society or the library could take on the project of putting them online so that Studley's contributions can reach a new generation. Unlike Studley, Charles Cummings was interested in history from the beginning and had undertaken graduate studies at Vanderbilt University, although he knew next to nothing about Newark when he arrived in the early 1960s to work in the library's New Jersey room. He learned quickly. One of his early projects was preparing the index to Newark's town records, published in 1966 for the 300th anniversary. And for decades, he maintained an index to New Jersey articles in the daily issues of the Star-Ledger. Cummings' attention to detail and ever-growing knowledge of Newark's history was matched by his extraordinary warmth of personality and graciousness in helping anyone with a genuine interest in learning about Newark. Philip Roth, who was first introduced to Cummings in 1992 by John Cunningham, got it right when he called Cummings the most generous of men, and added that for the people of Newark, quote, he was their librarian, archivist, historian, recording journalist, teacher, lecturer, and impassioned tour guide par excellence. And as you all know, Mayor Sharp James honored Cummings in 1998 by naming him Newark's official city historian, a title that Charles loved and certainly deserved. Newark is full of stories that explain our past and can inspire our future, and Cummings somehow knew almost all of them. He told those stories in many ways, but no way was more important than his weekly Knowing Newark columns for the Star-Ledger that ran for nearly 10 years, from March 1996 to December 2005. In fact, one appeared after his death that he had written in advance. And I may be one of the few who has read all 498 columns, because I took on the task of formatting and lightly editing them for the Knowing Newark website that Bob Hartman designed so handsomely for the library. Some of the columns are finely crafted essays, while others show the relentless pressure Cummings faced in meeting a weekly deadline, but all demonstrate his commitment to local history as a discipline and his love and appreciation for Newark. There is no overarching narrative, no sustained and compelling argument, but together his Knowing Newark columns are a legacy that any city would value. I have talked about 3 Newark historians in the monumental camp, Atkinson, Urquhart, and Cunningham, and 2 others in the antiquarian category, Studley and Cummings. But I want to end by focusing on just one Newark historian whose work exemplifies critical history, and that is Warren Grover. I noted earlier the interplay between history and civic memory, and how important it is for local historians to interrogate civic memory. Among historians of Newark, I think no one has done a better job of interrogating and amplifying Newark civic memory than Warren Grover in his book, Nazis in Newark. Warren ran to the ground the fragmented stories about Newark's new Minutemen, those Jewish boxers from the old Third Ward, some of them enforcers for Newark's crime boss, Longy Zwillman, who used, quote, fists, clubs, and baseball bats to counter the Nazi threat through much of the 1930s. To capture and test memories from this period, Warren consulted 70 different manuscript archives, reviewed the files of 24 different newspapers, and conducted an astonishing 72 personal interviews. And often he was just in time. 17 of the people he interviewed died in the few years between when he began his research and when he published his book in 2003. The result of all this research is his richly detailed and compelling narrative about how Newark became what he calls, quote, the first major battleground in America in the struggle against domestic Nazism. And one of the marks of good history is that it makes possible comparisons with events in other places and in other periods. In that way alone, Warren's Nazis in Newark is good history. Who knew that Charlottesville, where neo-Nazi marchers chanted racist and anti-Semitic slogans in August, would make Warren's book so excruciatingly relevant in our own day? After those demonstrations, President Trump and others suggested an exculpatory notion of moral equivalence by noting that there were, quote, bad dudes on both sides. In contrast, Warren's book challenges us not to look away, while at the same time providing a thoughtful and nuanced analysis. In Nazis in Newark, he describes how Nat Arno and the other Minutemen confronted homegrown Nazis and disrupted their rallies. And he explains how they depended on Longies-Willman's corrupt ties to Newark politicians and judges in order to get them off easy when they were arrested. There is little question that these men could be considered bad dudes. But Warren takes his analysis much deeper by comparing what the Minutemen did to how other groups in Newark addressed the rise of Hitler and the threat of domestic Nazism. He examines the actions of rabbis and Jewish community leaders, of liberal Protestants, Catholic priests, and business leaders, of Italians, Irish, and African Americans, of union leaders and communists, of long-established German American groups and the more recent German immigrants. His willingness to cast his net so wide, looking at those on the margins as well as those in the center of Newark life, adds critical depth and texture to his account. And it makes it all the more important. Nobody gets off easy in his book, nor should they, nor should we. In a way, as he explained, Warren's research led to the formation of the Newark History Society. Doing historical research can be solitary, and it can be hard to tap into civic memory or find the relevant sources. John Cunningham told me early on how much he had wished there had been a group like ours when he was doing his work. As we mark this 15th anniversary of the Newark History Society, we can take a measure of pride in what we have accomplished so far. Look around the room at the flyers for our public programs over the last decade and a half. We couldn't even fit all of them. The topics have spanned the full range of Newark's 350-year history, and by my count, 140 different people have participated as speakers or panelists, adding their insights and recollections to Newark's public memory. We have taped all the programs since 2008, posted them on YouTube, so they will continue to reach a broader audience. However, there is still more work to do to fill in and extend the outline of Newark's history that B.T. Pearson started in 1835. Fortunately, there has been a lot of emphasis in recent years on encouraging and recording Newark's civic memory through oral history projects, public history programs, and various online resources. A number of people have published memoirs. The library has undertaken a massive project to digitize its materials related to the Great Migration of African Americans to the North and to Newark, and to the Latino immigrant experience. These efforts are critical not only to the formation of civic memory, but also to using that memory to guide new initiatives in Newark. And with the decline of daily newspapers, they will be even more important going forward. But it's crucial not to stop there. The job for historians of Newark, even if like me they are interested in earlier periods, is to review the secondary sources, interrogate our civic memory, and take a deep dive in the archives, because memory is often incomplete, and sometimes the work of other historians is wrong or misdirected. By finding new sources and asking new questions, we can develop a new understanding of what happened in Newark and how we got to where we are today. This is how our knowledge of Newark's history will keep changing. There is certainly no lack of topics to explore. The work of Gail Malmgreen and her colleagues with the Newark Archives Project is making that abundantly clear. If you have any doubt, or indeed if you're looking for a good topic, pull Gail aside and you'll come away fully convinced and ready to get to work. Tonight is our chance to pause and raise a glass. It's our chance to congratulate Warren Grover for his scholarship and thank him for his leadership. But I think our task tonight is also to look ahead. Tonight we can celebrate, but tomorrow it will be time to follow Warren's example and do the work of history, assessing civic memory, scouring the secondary sources, searching the archives, and doing the hard thinking that informs good history. Let's get to work. Thank you.
Tim will be happy to answer questions informally over coffee and dessert, which is waiting for you outside in the gallery. But before you leave, let me draw your attention to the membership form on your seat. You may be sitting on them. If you're already a member, thank you. But of course, the year is almost over. So if you are a member and you want to take that form home and send in your renewal for 2018, that will save us a 50-cent stamp to remind you to do so. If you're not a member, please consider joining. If you're a friend of Warren's joining us for the first time, we hope to see you again. And perhaps you'd like to consider making a contribution to the Newark History Society in honor of Warren. Yeah. And if that's not enough, as a special gift to all of you, we have a keepsake souvenir that reproduces the flyers from our past programs and information about our society. We've got somebody positioned at both doors, Tom William, who will give you one as you leave to go out and have some coffee and dessert and carry on our conversation. Oh, and one important historical thing about Warren that nobody mentioned, did you know he was named after Warren G. Harding? I am not making this up. You know, one of our finer presidents. There's a great story about why that is, which I will not tell, but if you want to ask Warren, I'm sure he'd be happy to tell you that. So please join us for dessert in the gallery, and thank you all for coming.